What is going on? Welcome back to the show. This is MJ Lennon, and I am joined by none other than the amazing Paul McIlroy.
Which, although it sounds like I'm a magician or an escape artist, I'm actually a strength and conditioning specialist.
Welcome back to the Fitness Business Life podcast. Paul, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, for those who don't know you, Paul, which I would assume very little people on this show after my introduction, but
the amazing Paul,
the amazing Paul McIlroy. So, for those who don't know you, let's give them a little bit of background into yourself, because I know you for 20, 25 years now.
Jeez,
it's a stretch.
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
I know. It is an absolute stretch. But let's bring them back to where it all started, and then we'll bring it up to the present day, because there's a lot that I feel like the audience can extract from the conversation.
Just the general process.
Just the general process. So I want to give them a bit of background into how we got to here. Obviously, you've grown up in Belfast, not too far from myself, and West Belfast.
Yeah. The Wiki Wild Wild West.
And I actually know, I remember your D saying to me before that, I don't know if maybe this was before you came along, but he grew up in the Short Strand, or at least he was there for a while.
When he was there until he was still single digits. It was probably like six or 7 years old or something like that, and then he came over to the West with Mummy and Daddy. I wasn't quite there yet. I was born in the West. And
so you grew up in West Belfast in the midst of...
I grew up at the very hardest time to do it, I would say.
Yeah. What was your earliest memories from that period?
Earliest, now, here's the thing. As you well know, I have somewhat of a photographic memory.
Yes.
So this is a bit unusual, but I actually have, in many ways, at least in some ways, stronger memories of the early 1980s than D, who's 9 years older than me.
Right, okay.
You know, like I'll remember things that he didn't remember from like 1982, when I'm running about as a young kid.
Was your family impacted by the Troubles much? Like, did you see much of that going on, or was your parents sort of kept you away from that as best as they could, or sort of what happened
Well, like everybody's parents at the time, I suppose they done their best to shield their children from the realities, but after a while, as I'm sure you can relate to, it became almost like it was impossible. It was impossible almost from the get-go, and after a certain age, it was almost like, well, for a start, you don't have a choice sometimes, whether or not you're being shielded from it or not. You know, I've witnessed things when I was a kid. You know, I seen a British soldier getting blown up from across the street, and getting blown right across the street and bouncing off Dunville Park railings and slumping down like this, like half hung together.
And you were what, 10, 12 years of age?
I was 12 when that happened. I was exactly 12. And younger than that, when I was in single digits age, I almost witnessed a punishment shooting in Devonshire, just across from Davis Flats. I walked down an alley, and balaclava, gun-clad men had a teenager on the ground, and they turned around and screamed at me to F off, and I hightailed it faster. I would have given Usain Bolt a run for his money that day, and I heard the shots and I heard the screams, and I was single-digit age, I would say, honestly, 6 or 7 years old. And that's only some of the things, you hear bombs going off on a semi-regular basis. The news did very little to shield it. And I was always kind of a wee bit different in the way that I consumed information versus a lot of my peers, in that I was always into adult conversations and had an understanding, potentially a wee bit beyond my years, of what was going on. So it was impossible to shield anything really from me after a while. And I even remember, my father doing things like allowing me to watch movies that were like action movies that were quite, like the Terminator and Commando, and things that were 15s and 18s even, that were quite bloodthirsty. Obviously, if there was any scenes that were inappropriate in a different way, it was close his eyes. But for the actual
fast forward,
look at the wall. You know what I mean? And you're just looking at the wall for a while. Can I turn around yet? I go ahead. But when it comes to the actual action side of things, I remember him letting me watch this, and I remember my mummy saying to him he shouldn't be watching this, and he says he sees it in the streets every day. It was almost like a form of conditioning, do you know, like the way you would like progressive resistance, you know, and that is what he disclosed to me at a later date. What he was attempting to do is like micro desensitization.
Right.
Do you know, my daddy was a very cerebral man who was frustrated with his achievements or lack of achievements relative to his own like intellectual potential in life. But we got to see it. Like for example, his family, he had to leave school very, very early. And the Christian brothers were like pleading with his mommy to keep him in school. He has so much potential. And he's like, I need X many people bringing in money to the house, otherwise we won't eat. You know, was the thing with my granny type of thing. So he had some. We got to see how intelligent he was. We got to see him play out all his wee tactics and impart his philosophies on life and his intellectual musings on us on an almost daily basis. It probably should have been in a lecture room somewhere in another world if he had had the different opportunities, but we got to see it play out organically, and it was interesting in hindsight some of the things.
I've heard you mention your father loads of times and speak very highly of him so often. Do you think that, and I know you grew up in West Belfast, obviously, and to be fair, I mean, at the time, I think it's changed slightly now. People are generally more academic driven now.
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
But you were even back then, and do you think that your father kind of, I don't want to say, like he almost give you a nudge in that direction because of what he missed out on? Was that it?
I appreciate your diplomacy. It was more than a nudge. Right, okay. It was the front of his foot. Boom. No, in a nice way, yes.
What was it, nature or nurture?
It was like most things in life that are innately multifaceted. It was probably a generous helping of both.
Okay.
But nurture played a huge part in it. Right. I could definitely see and understand now, actually looking back, numerous intersections in my life that could have taken me a different direction, regardless of the potential direction that I could have went. And it was probably didn't go that direction because of the effort that both my mother and my father made, particularly in our formative years, to steer us true north, right? Because you're growing up in McDonald Street, initially, and then Devonshire, which was right across from Divis Flats and the Divis Tower. So it was all that sort of Divis area, which for those that don't know, in the 1980s was a notorious urban ghetto.
Yeah. It was the worst housing estate in the whole of Europe.
It was the worst housing estate in Europe. I remember reading that in a book in the school that I went to in high school years later, that it was the most underprivileged housing estate in Europe, and then for other reasons it was very dangerous. You know, obviously we were existing in the background. The backdrop was an urban guerrilla war, essentially. What was going on? Well, officially a conflict, euphemistically referred to as the Troubles, but troubles they were, as you remember yourself, you know. So you're living in this environment, and there was just so many opportunities on a daily basis to do things that, you know, were maybe, you know, the wrong side of the law or this or that, and in degrees of shades of grey, away from what was morally right and what was very wrong, and almost nobody went from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. But these shades of grey that were constantly available as you got older and as you got more independent and as you became more influenced by your peer group than you were your parents, it just slowly but surely inched people towards things that weren't as productive as what they could. Well, they were productive, but in a way that maybe wasn't the best way to do it. You know, so
and
yes, the upbringing. He really, sorry for interrupting you.
No, you're okay.
But to your first point, him and my mummy really emphasised education, sport as well, but in a background sense, something that would take my, you know, naturally high energy, and the aggressive nature the aggressive nature of the environment that we were surrounded in, and try to take that aggression and channel it towards something positive, as opposed to fighting in the street or things like that, which happened obviously multiple times. But also that educational backbone, like, this is the way out.
Yeah.
It was constantly said, this is the way out. I could have done it. You know, your mommy could have done it. We weren't allowed to do it, essentially. We didn't have the opportunity to do it. But because I'm doing all this, like, he would work 2 jobs, he would do this, he would do that, you would never see him. You know, sometimes, and this is affording you the opportunity just about to be able to do this, you know, so you owe it to us as well as yourself, as well as generations of your family, to be the first to do this, and me and my brother did.
When did I'm guessing it was at a really early age, but and for me, and I know a lot of people in and around our generation will have chosen either academics or sport. But you kind of broke the mold in a sense where you really delved into both. Was there a lot of, like, was there pressure on you? Not, I suppose, self-inflicted pressure, in the sense that, because, you know, you started boxing at what age?
13.
At 13 years of age. And my guess is that you were doing well at school at that time, because, like I said, I know you long enough now. Was there, like, self-inflicted pressure on you to do both, or did it always, like, kind of come natural? And when did you really start investing in, I suppose, combining the two? Because if you think about it now today, that's essentially...
Yeah. That's what I do. Yeah. It's cerebral sports. Essentially, it's the science, and it's the art and the science of program design. Yeah, so I'd be lying if I said a lot of it wasn't innate and almost by accident. I'm just being honest. You know, yes, I was pushed in that direction, but my father had a very naturally high IQ, and my mother was an intelligent woman as well, and so there was a nature side of it too that me and my brother were bestowed with, type of thing. And I think we are bestowed with talents, whether you want to go physical or metaphysical on the root of said talents, like whether you want to say, well, you were gifted this by God, or whether you want to say, you know, a series of random individuals over the course of your ancestry procreated, and this random selection of genes happened to come out in a favourable way for you.
Yeah,
and now you've got
a ginger beard.
You've got a ginger beard, yeah. And now you know, so-and-so over here, Usain Bolt can run 100 metres and blah, blah, blah because of all this. Yeah. Or Einstein has 160 IQ because of all that. So whether it's a physical coincidence or, you know, just, you know, evolutionary chance, or there's a metaphysical element to it, for whatever reason it ends up there, we all end up with natural talents and abilities that we didn't have to do anything to put there, right? So at that point, it's almost like it's almost like a responsibility to do something with it, right? You know, I kind of take umbrage with saying that I'm proud of this achievement or proud of that achievement, and using the word proud of something, because really and truly, it's been my experience that anytime I've ever gotten too proud of myself, it's came before a fall, like the old adage. Yeah. You know, it's almost like nothing really good comes from that thought process. And for me, what I've found is a more productive thought process is to free yourself from this vision of yourself that you did all this, right? Because, okay, I did work to optimize some of the intellectual and physical gifts that I was born with, but I didn't do anything to put them there in the first place. So there's only so much credit anybody can ever give themselves for anything. You know, can Shaquille O'Neal give himself credit for being 7'1"? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's like the brain is a physical thing as much as anything else. You know, there's a metaphysical kind of aspect to it where we find it hard to quantify consciousness and what that actually is beyond the electrical impulses and the ties between the synapses and what that means for our personality and the subsequent behavior that we then exhibit. But at the same time, it exists inside a physical organ that's inside our body that coordinates all the rest. So it's a physical thing as much as anything else. Yeah. And so it's there. It's there from birth, for better, for worse, in this area or that area.
Sounded like you give credit to the universe for what happens. It's like,
Yeah,
it's
well,
almost like detaching.
Well, it's
what will be will
it's
be.
something. There's something, you know, whether you want to give it, say, the universe, you want to say God, you want to say nature, you want to say evolution, you want to say random chance. It wasn't me, one way or another. It was something outside of me that was either totally random or greater than me, and therefore, you know, what else are we going to do? We're here. What else are we going to do if we have these gifts? We have to use them. And what are we going to use them for, then becomes the next question. And that should be, as best as I can tell, for the optimization of you as an individual in terms of the good that you can do with the gifts that you've been given. Now, there is a period of time where you have to become good enough to even consider what you're capable of is going to be good for anyone. You know what I mean? It's like a white belt in jiu-jitsu who wants to teach his mate jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He's going to teach his mate some things, but he'd be better off just bringing his mate to the jiu-jitsu class so that the black belt who takes it can, you know, really teach them what to do. Right? So even if that white belt has the potential to be better than his instructor, better than his black belt one day, more natural ability, he still has to realize that in order to earn a seat at the table where you're holding court and teaching other people how to do things, it's a prerequisite that you spend a period of time honing your own thing before you start trying to do anything with anyone. There's too many people nowadays. I'm starting to sound old, Lenny. The kids nowadays.
No doubt we were going to go there anyway.
It's going to go there because we have seen too many winters, my old son. And unfortunately, I've seen more than you. Well, just a few, but you know what I mean. It's like this insta-famous, you know, or I'm an influencer. Yes, maybe you are, but you should consider that responsibility because maybe you've become an influencer for reasons other than expertise in the given area that which you're trying to exert influence. Yeah. Right? Maybe you've become an influencer for other intangible or unrelated reasons. And so now you wield a power that you're actually not fit to. And so this is the problem where there's a lot of people who have they are influencers. That's an accurate term. They wield a lot of influence over people who are even less educated in the subject matter than them. Because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. You know, but as soon as you're looking through two eyes that are 20/20, you know, you're at the puppet show and you can see the strings that are attached, and it's like, so a long belabored point is that I spent a period of time developing my abilities to a certain level to the point where it was critical mass. And it's like, now I am actually qualified to actually take this and do something with it, you know. And even that was over 20 years ago.
So what drew you towards combat sports?
A combination of environment and nature. Of myself personally, this may or may not surprise you, in so far as long as you've known me, but my natural base personality is not one that sought out or reveled in conflict. In fact, quite the opposite. When I was a child, probably because my parents did such a good job of trying to shield me from the very, very brutal, harsh realities of where it was we were actually existing. That I wasn't a naturally aggressive person who would naturally have a proclivity towards clenching my fist and hitting somebody for doing something, you know. And my environment was a brutal one. Like I can vividly remember that my first day in primary one, right, in first grade, so to speak, for anybody who's an American. And there was a street fight. There was two kids. I came in late to the class. Right? This is my photographic memory. This is 1984, right? But we were Damien and my mummy both brought me. I never went to nursery school. We just didn't go. Okay. You know, this wasn't one around. And I went one day to some place and I didn't like it. And I was just like, I'm not bringing you back. There was more things to worry about. There was buildings getting blown up and people getting shot. So I never went to kindergarten, so to speak. It was straight into elementary school, primary school for us, right? And on day one, I came in late, and then the teacher went out to talk to my mother. And these two kids who were pulled out, presumably for fighting, were at the blackboard, and then they just started fighting again. And I remember being horrified and terrified at what I was watching. Two kids who were young children, single-digit age. I mean, toe-to-toe warfare. I mean, toe-to-toe, quality straight punching, toe-to-toe, by the hair, this bang, bang, for a good 20 seconds before it was noticed by the teacher, which doesn't sound long, but to anybody who's ever been in a street fight, it's a long street fight. It's a long street fight. A street fight should be one and done if possible. But when you're a kid, street fights are harder almost because nobody has the power, very few people do, to knock people out. So it becomes this battle of attrition. I had enough of them, right? But there was this one individual and another individual. And one of the individuals who was involved in that became a tormentor of mine for the next 2 years.
Okay.
And every day I came home from school, and every day my mother and father would ask me, have you hit him yet? Type of thing. And I'd go, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And one day tomorrow actually came, and I won. I found out I was actually good at doing this. This kid was a year older, and he was bigger, head and shoulders taller. And it happened in the toilets at toilet time, and I just snapped this day. He'd never actually physically hit me, but it was just like the verbal, like talking you down, and and then I would feel bad because I backed down, because then I would talk back to him, and he would go, well, come on then, and I would go, oh, and that went on for a couple of years until this day I snapped and actually won, and that was a turning point. And after that, anybody who stepped out of line, I was right in there, and I always won. I was winning. As a kid, not only as a kid, I was a kid, and I developed a reputation for being the best in the class, and eventually in P7, the man type of thing. So there was part of it because I knew I was good at fighting, and my brother had also started. He had competed. He'd had about 20 kickboxing fights and had only lost one.
Right.
And had started boxing and was showing a lot of promise in that. So I had discovered I had an athletic advantage in terms of sprinting speed and jumping and different things. And I was looking at the poverty that we were living in. And believe it or not, the reason why I started boxing was I wanted to try and do something. I was going to use my brain to get us out, and I was going to use my body. And boxing, I thought, was something that would eventually lead to money. That was my goal, was to be a professional boxer and to go that route. And I almost did go that route, but I didn't eventually. And in the end, I didn't go that route. But that was the reason why. That was the reason why I started.
What was can you remember your first day in the boxing gym?
Yes, and I can remember. Well, I'll skip forward just slightly. I can remember my first proper spar in the Immaculata with a friend of mine who was at the time a 3 times Irish champion, who was 2 years older than me. We were the same body weight, but I hadn't done much boxing training, hardly any, at that point. But I was the storied veteran of maybe probably about 30 street fights without a defeat, like among people my own age, that lasted maybe somewhere between 10 and 30 seconds each. And so I was getting in confidence through the roof, and I found out within about less than 30 seconds that all of that meant absolutely nothing squared. Yeah. Nothing squared. I was humbled within a round. And I'll tell you better than that again. He obviously had to go easy in his humbling of me. I remember catching him one good hard shot, and I remember him going back and then nodding at me like that and going like, good shot. And then after that, he opened up for about 30 seconds, and I was like, I discovered what a body shot was. I'd never been properly hitting the body in a street fight. It was all head hunting with kids and trying to grapple, and and oh my God, right in the floating rib. I was like, oh, and I grabbed him. I got through 3 rounds, three 1.5 or 2 minute rounds or something like that, and it felt like 100 years. And at that point, I realized there's a difference between people who are untrained and people who are trained. So it was a very humbling first experience in a boxing ring?
So I can remember at least my own thought process coming up to fights. I got really anxious about fights. Like, I was so afraid, because I think, like yourself, I have a sort of natural proclivity, which is odd given the choices.
I know I've done it too, but it doesn't make any sense.
Which is quite odd, but I do have a natural proclivity to stay away from confrontation. But practically all of my chosen sports are directly in the line of confrontation, which is fucked up. But knowing full well that I was getting into confrontation, it used to fill me with so much anxiety. Were you the same?
100%. You know, in fact, it's impossible to know who was worse, but I would say if you were worse than me in that regard, you were very bad, because I used to get very nervous.
Yeah. I used to heave and shit in the shower before.
Yes. I remember there had been a 3-year gap. I boxed over the course of about an 11-year period competitively, but at one point there was a 3-year gap. I had lost a fight to the world junior silver medalist, and it was the first fight that I'd ever lost in boxing.
Right.
And for some reason I thought that this was the worst thing in the world, because somebody's O had to go and it was mine.
Jeez, you were ahead of your time with that shit.
I know, well. You know, it was the mid-90s and I was like 16, and it was the final of the Ulsters, and it meant nothing. And I did actually quite well. Well, I didn't. I was widely outpointed, but there was at least a shining moment in time where I had him actually hurt at 6s and 7s with one of the shots that landed. And pretty much after that, it was one-way traffic in terms of skill, because he was so good, he was so experienced, he was a southpaw, everything that I hated. And he outboxed me cleanly. Yeah. And it wasn't just that I lost; it was that I lost with a wide computer point score, and it was almost outclassed. It was like wide. Yeah. The score was 12-2. That's what it was. But now that sounds like when we weren't hitting each other at all. But you know, for anybody listening, what that means is we both hit each other about 100 times each. Right? You know, and that's how, and that was the points that you were given credit for, because I think all 5 judges, there was 5 judges, had to hit the point within a second of each other or something before.
Yeah, I remember that old system, yeah.
You know, and they didn't score things like body shots, and the head shots had to be like 100% on the white part of the glove.
Yeah.
So you were battering each other, and it was coming out like hardly anybody had hit anybody. So anyway, I kind of just stopped boxing for a while and started doing other things. I was actually one of the periods where I started strength training.
Yeah.
You know, that's when I first started strength training.
I remember you fighting, and I remember seeing you and going, bro's a fucking, he's been in the weight room for fucking too long. Like, Jesus.
Yeah.
So what was it at 6? Did you start taking strength training seriously?
I started about 16. Yeah. Before that, from the age of about 13, I was strength training. I was doing push-ups, I was doing body weight exercises. That's resistance training, like anything else. There's people who develop tremendous physiques and doing only that. I was doing circuit training for boxing, and you know, believe it or not, punching bags, like heavy bags and pads, that's plyometric, that's explosive, you know. So boxing is resistance training itself, but officially like structured with the intention of getting stronger with barbells and dumbbells. I was 16.
Who was your early influences in the strength training world? Because I'm going to say, well, Arnold had to be an influence. I mean, I know your love of movies as well, but I also know that you're a bit of a historian when it comes to all things physical culture, in a sense, like pretty much all things. So who were the people that you looked to for influence? And again, I know Dee was a big influence on you as well. I
was going to say the very first person was probably my daddy, and then my brother. Okay. Like my daddy was a wee bit taller than me. He was about 6'1", and he was very broad, and he had like really abnormally long arms. Right. Sound like anybody? Yeah. But he was bigger than me though. Okay. And he'd never any official training. One of the things that I actually always lament about is what if I could have actually trained my daddy when he was in his physical prime and he really, really put everything into it. What could he have become? Because he was a specimen, you know, and he didn't do any training. He worked physical jobs, so maybe that was training in a way. But I seen him do things like, 2 25-kilo gas canisters, and I was with him as a kid, and he was walking for, it must have been over a mile, with these on his shoulders. And he threw one of them off the ground like that, whoop, and caught it on his shoulder. And he was like, move out of the way, son. And threw the other one up and caught it like that on his shoulder. He would do these things without even really even thinking about it.
Yeah.
He was the first person I ever seen do a pistol squat. You could do one-arm push-ups. He could do a one-arm pull-up. These were things he could just do. And he used to do them to, like, I bet you I can't do this or you can't do that. As him and his mates would bet to see who could do things and things like that. And he was into all these feats of dexterity, and he was a great swimmer and stuff like that. I seen him do 2 lengths of the old Falls Leisure Centre underwater. And so he was this constant.
Just a fucking stud.
He was a specimen of a man, and this is what you had to look up to. And anytime he hurt himself in things, he showed no emotion. No emotion. It was like, it reminds me of that.
That's my kind of dude.
It reminds me of that skit that the Irish-American comedian and actor, what do you call him? Oh God, I forget his name. I forget his name now in the moment. What do you call him? He played Edgar Smiley in The Demolition Man. Dennis Leary, there you go.
Right.
He's an Irish-American stand-up comedian, and he's talking about his daddy, who was Irish, right? And he says, old school Irish. He said, me and my brother watched him. He was hammering a nail in the wood, and he missed. He got distracted. He put the nail right through his hand, right? He says, he took that shit out, put a plaster on it, carried on working. Says at that point, me and my brother both looked at each other and we realized we could never cry again. It was just like, my daddy did some things, and I realized, I can't really, in front of this man, I can't, show an undue level of weakness because he just exhibits so much strength, type of thing.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like that's a positive male influence.
It is.
Because today that would be labelled as toxic masculinity.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing. It was just him. Yeah. He didn't do anything to, he didn't ever say, be like me.
Yeah.
He just was himself.
Yeah.
Didn't expect us to do anything. But that was the role model. So it was like, right, okay. Like my brother Damien, if you ask him, he'll say, he said a few times, I don't remember you ever crying as a child.
Okay.
Like when you fell off stuff and hurt yourself, or you did this and you did that. From an early age, actually from around that time where I stood up to the verbal bully guy, I made a conscious decision type of thing that I was always going to try and, I didn't know what stoic meant, but I was always, essentially that's what I decided to be. I was just sort of naturally that way, but I think it was the example of my father played into that role. And then because we grew up in the 80s, it was the explosion of the action movie star. Right, so I was getting hit with pop culture individuals like He-Man and Spider-Man and the Hulk and Arnold, right? And almost all of these individuals went through a transformative journey. Peter Parker into Spider-Man, Bruce Banner into the Hulk, Prince Adam into He-Man, and even Arnold had to transform from skinny Arnold into Mr. Olympia. So there was this, from an early age, I remember, I think the A12, like the body transformation thing that I've become probably most known for, that's all around the world, was actually probably first came into fruition. That notion of being able to transform from something weaker in some ways to something stronger that was more useful to be able to protect its loved ones, to be able to go places that the weaker person couldn't, was in some way born out of those early experiences and out of a need and a necessity, subconsciously but also consciously, if I'm honest, to transcend my own suboptimal surroundings. And so that was the background catalyst to every decision I ever made: boxing, weight training, strength stuff, powerlifting, all of that.
Now that you say that, I can see the connection between. It's
interesting.
It's weird for me because having watched your journey from the very early days to what it is today, like it's all been influenced obviously by past experiences, which I suppose is true for everyone. Your epigenetics will dictate how you live your life today and how you view the world. But it's weird because it's so apparent now, because I've never actually heard you say that before.
Yeah.
But now that you say it, I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, joining the dots. Yeah. Do you know, it's one of those realizations that it took me to actually sit back one day after the inaugural live Amazing 12 certification 10 years ago. I had like a reflective moment where I sat back and looked over. I was able to look over how far everything came up to that moment. And, you know, it was actually only then that I fully connected that particular dot and was like, oh, right, okay. You know, I was the first person I transformed. And I've been obsessed with optimizing from one form to another within the same individual for a beneficial outcome that branched out into every area of the individual's life for a very long time. And I was my own first project in that regard. And you know, actually connecting to what we said earlier about first optimize yourself, then dare to optimize, have that spill over to maybe your family, which I did do, and then dare to maybe optimize your greater community. And then and only then, looking at how that went, could you potentially be brave enough to potentially influence the wider world and society in some way that is applicable to your own talents and abilities. And sequentially, that has been the Milo of Cretan sort of progressive overload path that I have ended up following. A combination of wittingly and unwittingly, if I'm honest, you know, but it's ended up here.
Yeah, I suppose there were, I don't know about you, like, but I kind of did, me personally, I did have a sort of vision for what I wanted. And even the room that we're sitting in now, you know, when I seen this place 15 years ago, and I was like, nah, that's not workout world. That is that's a gym. Like, that's an institution. Yeah. I had that in my head, albeit the steps that actually got us to this facility were like filled with course corrections. And I know you'll have experience in this as well, but so many times where you've been deflected off the path, but ultimately you've came back that way. And I suppose for you, did you have, and I know you said you wanted to kind of impact the wider world, but did you know, because I know you were going to university, you were studying sports science.
Sports science, yeah.
And did you know that even then you were going to do something big? When you were at uni, and I'm guessing at the same time, you were still doing combat sports, you were still doing like mixed martial arts, maybe you were still powerlifting, I'd imagine, at that stage.
Yeah, well, I had stopped powerlifting for a wee while, and when I first went to university, I was actually training in John Breen's.
Okay.
To potentially go pro, and I was flirting between there and a few different places, sparring Big Rogie and all. Some experiences from down there. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of the wee ring. John's a legend, doesn't get enough credit. But the wee ring in Breen's original gym, you literally couldn't swing a cat in it.
Yeah, and they had the superstars
surrounded by heaters with a suspended ceiling that if you were over like 6'4", you couldn't even stand in. And it was just, so what that means is the heat was insane, both literally and metaphorically. There was nowhere to run, there was nowhere to hide. That was some experience, but yeah, doing that while simultaneously going to university and doing different things, yeah.
And did you have an idea then? Because from my recollection, right, now obviously, so whenever I decided to become a personal trainer, I was like, well, it makes sense to me to go and speak to someone who I know who has the most experience in this. And I don't know if you remember, but you had taken over Santaur at the time. I think it might have been like really early. Yes, I walked in and I was like, Paul, I'm sick of what I'm doing here. Like, I want to do this here, and I've always wanted to do this, but I just don't know what to do. And you said to me, oh, disregard everything that anyone else tells you, go and do the RKC certification and that will put you on the right path. And I was like, well, I'm going to listen to the person who's been there and done it. And so that's, I still today tell people, just go to someone who's done what you want to do and ask them, and don't try to get fucking cute, just do the thing that they tell you to do. And so, I don't know if you know it or not, but that was kind of that almost like a turning point where I was like, okay, oh, so that's all I have to do? All right, well, if someone tells me, I'm just going to go and do it. So for you, you had taken over Santaur at the time and you started to combine all of these things. Now, I know you were at a bit of a crossroads at that stage, which was, do I still continue on with combat sports? Is this going to make me money? Or do I go down the route of opening a gym? What was happening in your life at that point? Because, like I say, you were, from my recollection, I knew another guy. I don't know if you remember Colin Kern.
The name's familiar.
He was actually on, do you remember the show Gladiators?
Yes.
Right, so he was on Gladiators, right?
Yes.
So it was him. I knew he was in the fitness industry. To what extent, I wasn't really familiar with. But you were one of the earliest coaches. Yes.
Right?
So
Colin, that took me to search my memory banks of the actual show.
Yes.
There you go. So that's a memory. Google Gadget memory come in handy.
And it's back out now. The show's back up and running. So he actually got to the semi-final.
Yeah, he did well.
And I knew he was in the fitness industry at the time. And I knew you were.
Did you know I auditioned for Gladiators?
I didn't know it. How'd that go?
It went really well physically, but I was too young. I blew all the physical tests out of the water, but it came to an intersection where I was young, like, where I was in front of a camera, and I had to kind of, like, whoop-de-whoop, like, it was almost like cut a promo type of thing, and I just was a kid from Davis.
Of course.
And I just wasn't up for it at all, and I was very serious, and I was still, like, had my combat sports head on. And I was like, if my mates see this,
black eye.
I was like, I was in that sort of mindset, and it didn't go well. And I remember actually doing one of the tests, and the referee, John Anderson, at the time, he was like, that was in front of everybody in the arena, that was the second fastest time ever, like that in a Scottish accent.
Jesus.
And I was just like, you're meant to go like, yeah, and do all this, and I was just like, thanks. It was just. It was a show.
Yeah.
It was as much a show as it was, and it was a tremendous athletic display, but it was as much a show as it was anything else. So I can't say for sure, but I think that's what nailed what done me out.
I done the same thing on Ninja Warrior UK.
Did you? Right?
Yeah. So again, bombed through the trials.
Yeah.
And then in the video audition, they said, look, you have to bring something to the table that would set you apart. And I was like, all right. So I actually brought in a 12th grade bolt.
Unbent it?
On camera. Like,
that's class.
Mate, like,
if that doesn't set you apart, I don't know what does.
Well, I thought so as well, but obviously my video recording skills were atrocious.
You'd probably do better now. I would have done 20 times better now, do you know what I mean? But, that ship has sailed. Or has it?
Mate, I don't know. Here, it's back out now. There's your opportunity.
If they've got room for a middle-aged man. But yeah, no, at that time it was all the bells and whistles like the old Gladiators. So it would have been fun.
Quality.
Do you know, it would have been fun.
And so I know there was a point in time where you had to decide between athlete or entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What did that look like? And you and I remember, again, I started training in Queens, and I know you were training in Queens at the time, and I had known you before that, but I was like, fucking bro has been, like, what's his supplement stack?
I remember bumping into you that day as
what
well,
is going
You were
on?
doing weighted dips.
Yeah.
There you go.
And you were doing weighted dips with like every fucking plate in the gym, and I'm like, bro, what the fuck? What have you been doing? And so we were training in Queens, and then I remember you actually started training people in, like just as a side note, pretty much all of the meathead gyms in the early days.
Yes.
Like we bumped into each
Oh, yeah,
other
yes,
in
yes,
all of
yes.
those gyms. They were
Yes.
just old spit and sawdust gyms.
And there was only a handful
that
and
we
they
were attracted
proper,
to.
Proper
Yeah,
gyms.
yeah.
There wasn't really such a thing as the global gyms.
No.
The very first one ever to come over here, I think, was LA Fitness or maybe Fitness First, something like that.
Yeah.
But that was like the late 90s, early 90s.
And so you had then, so for any of the historians in Belfast, they might not remember the old Santaur.
Yes.
Some of the younger generation is going to be listening to this, like, what, I mean,
Where do you start with Santaur?
like, it was, whenever you and I first started training in it, there was carpet on the ground
Yes.
that was still there
From
from
the
when
60s.
Arnold trained in
Yes,
it, like
yes.
Arnold Schwarzenegger trained in Santaur.
Yes.
Victor owned it from the 60s. I'm
Yes.
almost sure that my grandfather trained in in
More than
Santaur
likely.
in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
60s.
yeah.
And it was still like that right up till the late 90s.
Yeah.
And you actually started
It was-
training people
Yeah.
in Santaur, didn't you?
It was like that up to the late 90s when I actually bought it.
Yeah.
Because Victor didn't change a single thing.
Yep.
And there was a lot of investment to try and make it sanitary and safe.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, but I also didn't want to go too far. I wanted it to retain its rustic individuality and to retain the essence that made it special.
Yeah, because it had a vibe. Santaur had a vibe. Like,
You could cut it and eat it. It was tangible.
Yeah.
Everybody PR'd in it
yeah.
on such a regular basis that it wasn't even funny.
I just remember like training in it, and it sounds so bro, but just getting like the sickest of pump.
Yeah.
It was just like,
It was a perfect environment for progress. It was also it was a very, very special place long before I took it over. In fact, that essence was what I was trying to not break, almost, rather than change. I'd like to think I put my own stamp on it, but it existed before it did. Like literally before I did. It was around since the 60s.
in the cultural sense, so it was always, the culture already existed.
Yes.
What didn't exist was the promotion of it.
Yes.
Because Victor he was
Victor-
there, and I
Well,
suppose,
Victor had his day.
Right, okay.
In the
Well,
60s and
yeah.
70s, where it was the most famous. There and Buster McShane's were the two most famous gyms in Belfast, and Victor actually expanded over to Leeds in England and stuff.
Yes, that's right, 'cause he had kids there,
Yeah,
didn't he?
yeah. And there was a Santaur in Leeds, and the owner of Santaur, or the runner of, like, the manager of Santaur Leeds, actually contacted me online in the mid 2010s. Because he had heard of me and the new Santaur, or well, the old Santaur that I'd taken over, and he sent me all these pictures of Santaur Leeds, and it was bizarre because it was like looking at Santaur Belfast. It had all the old 100-pound bars, with the blue plates, and
they were welded on.
all welded on, and all the old benches that were the exact same as the ones in Belfast. They were all made in Harland and Wolff, the place that made the Titanic. Probably not that long after they made the Titanic. It was a few years after Leo sank.
Yeah, looks like it took them
They
bars
really should have
directly off.
alternated. By the way, side note, they should have him and Kate should have alternated time on that door.
Yeah, there was no need for him
There
just
was
to
no
be in the
need for him
water
to
the
just
whole time.
randomly
Yeah.
freeze to death.
It looked like the two of them could have fitted on that.
Probably could have fitted on too with a bit of effort. Anyway, so so this culture, Santaur was almost like Switzerland during the Troubles,
Right?
because people from both sides of the community
Yes.
who would literally kill each other outside that door, they hung everything up, both metaphorically and literally, before they entered that door, and everybody was civil to each other. It went beyond civil. Everybody was friends. Do you know? It was bizarre. I mean, it's not bizarre in that what it showed was that we're more alike than we are different, and when you take all the made-up bullshit away, we're actually just humans.
Yeah.
That's what it showed. It was almost like a social experiment. But that endured right up to when I took over. And one of the things that I did differently, Victor didn't allow football tops or anything that would discern Catholic and Protestant.
Okay.
Wouldn't discern one side and the other. you know, I can understand why, because there was more or less a civil war going on at the time. But I flipped that and said you're allowed to wear anything you want. And I was perfectly ready to flip it back if fist fights started to break out in the middle of the gym floor. But the opposite happened. Not to my surprise, I suspected that there was a 50-50, maybe 60-40 chance of this going that direction. But what actually happened was people would come in Celtic tops, people would come in Rangers tops, who were always friends, and they would slag each other about football. They would tease each other about whose team was the best. And they would do it in a way that was jovial, and then it was done. And then nobody mentioned it, and then they were just back to spotting each other and teasing each other about their hair and their face and your nose and your ears and all the things that they regularly took the piss out of each other over.
Yeah. And
that was it out of the way. And so it almost just dissolved and became a non-issue. So that was interesting. There was many things about the culture of Santaur that was very unique, very, very unique, and you know, like lightning in a bottle, like gold dust. Once you open the top and it's gone, it's very hard to recapture it because for some reason there was just that magic. Like, I remember Bill Casimir, the former 3-time world's strongest man and world record holder in powerlifting. Anybody that doesn't know, Bill was the first person ever to raw bench press 300 kilos, right? 661 pounds with a 2-second pause on his chest with no spinal arch whatsoever and a close-east grip. It was like just outside shoulder. You can watch the video. He brings it down, pauses it, and just drives it up. His back's just flat. His legs are out in front of him. It was just pure upper body strength. He was a brute of a man, you know.
That's not even a max effort.
No, and like over 9 on the squat and well over 8, nearly 9 on the deadlift. So an absolute brute of a man. And one of my heroes from when I was a kid, we're talking about those formative years, one of the big things was watching World's Strongest Man at Christmas and seeing these, like, you know, you're watching He-Man and then you're like, right, okay, but that's a fantasy. Oh no, here's some blonde guy like Jean-Paul Sigmarsson from Iceland who's screaming, I am the Viking, I am the strongest, with like big swords and stuff and the muscles and the blonde hair. And I'm like, oh no, humans can actually do this. Yeah. He's picking up a truck, you know? So Bill was one of those people that I was watching as a kid, and here he was in my gym cutting a promo about how good the A12 was, and you know, but one of the things he said was that the essence of everybody who's trained in this gym over the years, he says, I can feel it in the walls, he said. I can feel it in the walls, with his big deep voice. He says, you know, when blood, sweat and tears are shed in an area, it stays, you know, like their essence stays. So you had Arnold, you had Franco, you had Lou Ferrigno, you had Al Beckles, you had Reg Park, you had Bill Pearl, you had eventually Bill Casimir, you know, so that was all in the air, you know, with the same equipment. You're touching the same bars they touched because it was built then, and you know.
Speaking of the A12, so I suppose for any of our listeners that aren't familiar, so you had taken over Santaur, and I know before that you started, I remember, I think the original guy was Jared McManus, wasn't he? So he was like the first sort of transformation.
That was the friend who I sparred first as well.
Oh,
who
okay.
Took it easy on me after I landed a shot.
Right.
He was the first person who humbled me in a boxing ring. It was Jared McManus.
Yeah, and so Jared, and I know he had gone through, because I remember Jared, like back in the day, he was actually, he has a son to a girl from the area that I grew up, so I knew him from there, and because he had stopped boxing whenever I started. And I know that he had his troubles. I know there was things going on, and I know that his basically life had taken a bit of a downturn, and you were still friends with him, and so you helped him during the recovery process. And I remember back then, this was actually before people were doing like body transformations in the sense, you know, where you see it everywhere now. Yep. This was way back in the day, and he entered a competition and won it, didn't he, for the transformation? And so I would imagine that was almost the start of like that spiraled in a way. And it just so happened that the opportunity with Santaur then came about at the same time, and then that journey kind of continued, didn't it?
It was tremendously serendipitous and synergistic. It was very organically, you know, you would struggle to say that it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, the universe had your back.
Somebody did, something did. So what way that happened? It actually ties in perfectly to the question you asked earlier about the transition point between combat sports and you know entrepreneurship. So I trained. My father was terminally ill at this point. Lifestyle related, smoking all his life since he was a kid and what have you. That was another thing. He did all these physical feats and he smoked like a train. It was insane. Just anyway, I catched up with you eventually. And when he was like a senior citizen, so to speak, he was dying and he was in hospital and he lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Davis. And it was badly in need of. It was a single man. My father and mother had separated for a while at this point. It was a single man's apartment. Like it was just no bells and whistles. And I wanted to really do a job on it for him. He wanted to come home to die, essentially. He had stubbornly refused treatment the whole way along the way. Wow. Just wanted to live his life, and he says, his whole thing was, when God wants to take me, He'll take me. He was old school Irish, and that was it. And, so that was it. He was coming home. But before he came home, I wanted to fix up his flat, his apartment, so to speak. I struggle to say with a straight face apartment. Yeah. It was a flat in Davis, right? So I was trying to do it myself. I'm only in my mid-20s at this point, myself. And I'm trying to do this myself, and I haven't got a clue really. I'm trying my best. I'm working hard, but it's not turning out too well. And my friend Jared McManus heard this, and he's a painter and decorator by trade, but he had been, an alcoholic and a drug addict for a while, and his lifestyle was reflecting that. But he cleaned himself up for the period of time that it would have took him to help me do this. And in the impossibly short period of time that we had to do this, it was like something out of changing rooms. Like it was so quick, only it was 2 men, and my mother and her mate chipping in as well, to get this done, for him to come home, and it was a surprise, and he, the look on his face alone was worth it, and he was only there for a few days, and then he passed away in the house. And on the same night that he died, Jared, who had fulfilled his, what he was doing for me, no longer had a reason in his mind to stay sober type of thing, so he was then back on the drink, so to speak, and a situation transpired where he was set upon by, he doesn't even remember who or how many, and his neck was broken. He was placed on a curb, American History X style, and jumped on, and he was facing life in a wheelchair. And ironically, as the police report would later confirm, it was almost exactly the same time my father died. Like, it was so strange, the whole thing. My family didn't want to tell me this, but they did. And the next day, and I went straight to the hospital. So my father's body was just about cold, like. And the next thing you know, I'm in the hospital, and there's my mate facing life in a wheelchair. It wasn't a great couple of days, And he's in a whole body strap, and there was a small percentage chance that he wasn't going to be seriously hurt compromised for the rest of his life. And I remember him saying he was praying to God, and he was like, we both were type of thing, and it was emotional. Let me walk again. I'm going to turn my life around. I know I haven't been doing the things that I was supposed to be doing, but I will. I'll turn it all around. And then I remembered this thing that I tried to do in the 90s, which was Body for Life. It was the world's biggest body transformation program at the time. And they used to give away like Lamborghinis and Porsches and loads of money and all this, and you were famous in magazines and papers and the things at the time before the internet. But what I had noticed was that the trend was when people transformed their body over this 12-week period, it was such a intense intervention that it had a profound mental and emotional transformation as well. And, they had turned around many bad habits in their life and never went back, and all. It had a transformative effect outside of the body. It transformed them from the outside in, as opposed to from the inside out. And so I just said to him, Body for Life, like this, and he went, what? And I'm like, there's this thing. I only had 2 skills at the time because I was strength and conditioning specialist at that time. I was sports scientist at that time. And I'm like, listen, I can use these skills to get you into shape. We're going to win this. And you get all these things if you win. And the discipline of it or whatever it is transforms your outlook, do you know? And he was like, right, we're going to do this. I don't know if that gave him hope or what happened, if there was a divine intervention or if it was just a coincidence. But all of a sudden, his neck healed. And the doctors were like at 6s and 7s as to how this happened and how it happened so quickly. And he got out of the house in a neck brace and put a bar on his back. And I was like, what are you doing? Right? And he's like, I want to do it without you. I thought we were going to do this. And I was like, right, okay. Well, if you're going to do it without me, then you're going to do it with me. Do you know what I mean? Because that's better. And I was working as a strength and conditioning specialist, mostly with athletes during the day. And I was still training with it with an eye on combat sports for myself. I was doing so many things. And then at night time, I would train him. And sometimes we would climb into Conway Mill over the railings. Yeah, like I had a key.
I remember walking in on a session actually.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And we would do it in St. Gabriel's. We were climbing over these big fences at night time, all these different gyms that I was entrusted keys with, and we'd come in and out and blah, blah, blah. At midnight sometimes, we did this for 3 months with absolutely no clue of whether or not he would win. I just knew if I could keep him dedicated for 3 months, I would stand a chance of him continuing to go this way. And as it turned out, we won the thing. We won the thing. And we went over to London. And it's funny because I wasn't allowed to enter it in the 90s because it was only open to Americans. And one of the champions, one of the inaugural champions of it, who was in the book, was wearing his championship jacket and his ring. You know the way they do the whole the connection to the Super Bowl
like
thing?
Super Bowl thing.
Exactly right. And I was like, oh, I want to wear that jacket and that ring. You know, like I was only like, what, 18, 19 or something like that. And I wasn't open to me then. The guy who presented Jared with the overall, trophy and, all the stuff that came with that, including the championship jacket, the championship ring, all this here, was the guy in the magazine who I'd seen in the late 90s, right? And I walked up to him and was like, listen, Porter Freeman was his name. I was like, Porter, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I trained him and I really need to wear your jacket for a second. Is that all right? And he was like, oh, I know you, with like a big, thick sort of Texas accent. He says, you're the guy who said to him, get up, we can do this. You can wear my jacket anytime, like that. And I was like, okay. And so I got a picture, not only in a jacket, but the jacket and ring that I had seen in the magazine in the 90s. Isn't that bizarre, right? And so George's results spread around the locality of where my mum lived. I didn't live there at that point, around the Lower Falls. And a lot of other people contacted me about doing this. Some others contacted me. So I was kind of doing my work over here, and I was doing a lot of pro bono style transformations, and I was refining my process, applying the same principles of how to get strong really quickly for how to get big and ripped, because it quickly became apparent to me that the same things worked. The only thing you had to change was the loading parameters and the frequency and things like that. If I can make you really strong within a given rep range, you're going to be stronger. But if I can make you really strong within the rep ranges and volumes that are most conducive to muscular hypertrophy, I'm going to make you bigger, right? And if I can elicit the fastest aerobic and anaerobic gains in your body possible, you're going to get leaner if all other things remain equal in terms of calories and in terms of food. And then if I manipulate your diet as well, you're going to get even leaner and even bigger and stronger, right? So this just kept getting refined and refined. And I had all these transformations. Didn't know what to do with them because it wasn't my business. My business was performance enhancement. And on that note, I went to America to train with Matt Hughes and Ruthless Robbie Lawler, the 2 former UFC champions. And I was going over there with a view to become an MMA. I was trying to fast track my way to the UFC because I hadn't got a lot of experience. I didn't really want to spend my time fighting at that time in the noughties, like all these wee small halls around Antrim and this and that. I'd been to them and stuff, and I was getting a bit older. I was pushing 30. I wanted to try and fast track it. Do you know, at this point?
You essentially would have been a boxer in the UFC.
A boxer in the UFC. So I knew I had to learn the other things, and I had to learn them quickly. So I knew I had to learn them from the best. And so I went over there almost as an audition. I spent a month over there before I went to put up a new website, and would put the transformations on it just in case there was some sort of market for this sort of thing. I was almost embarrassed to put them up. That's the truth, right? All these things that I'd done for free. I was like, it's sort of like, it doesn't fit with this. I put them up, went over there, trained with those guys for a month. They did offer me a contract to fight for them. I came back over, checked my inbox, and there was like 200 emails about people wanting to pay me money to do that 12-week thing on them. Hadn't even got a name. And people going, I don't care how far I have to travel, don't care how much I have to pay. If you can do that to me, I'll pay you whatever I want. If you can do it that quickly. And then I was like, whoa, right? Then an opportunity came up simultaneous to this to buy the gym that I was working from, which was Santaur. And I was like, you know, does the man that chases two hares catch neither one here? I made an executive decision to not go back to America, to not cash in that contract, you know, and to stay here. And it was gutting. It felt like something inside me died a wee bit. But when I look at that, was a very self-serving thing, really. And it was also no guarantee I was ever going to do anything, because, you know, there was a lot of monsters, and maybe I would have got chewed up and spat out, maybe. We'll never know. But over here was something which has now transformed the lives of over 15,000 people, most of which I've never met, all around the world. It eventually went global. It's in over 180 locations around the world. And there's people who send through emails to the A12 headquarters, which eventually get to me, like Santa in Lapland, right? That are thanking me for things that I had no actual physical part in, that this program changed their lives. And like, you know, reinvigorated their relationship with their children and their parents and this, and literally saved their lives in some cases because they were in such bad physical condition. And it's humbling.
When did you, was there something that happened where, and I'm sure it's been a series of events where you have thought, right, okay, well, I'm selling this B2C, business to consumer right now.
Yeah.
Was it after, because at least I know for me, I was like, well, I run courses and people come through and do them. I'm going to do it at least 5 years, 6 years, 7 years of running these things, and then I will teach someone else how to do it. I don't know, we've touched on this a few times, you're very much of that nature as well. You started then going, well, B2B, there's gym owners, there's personal trainers, there's coaches, strength and conditioning coaches can do this as well.
Yeah.
What were some of the sticking points in going through that? Because I know I know back in the day you were kind of quite secretive around the whole process.
Yeah.
Right? Which is fair enough. Was that an issue for you, starting to share the process?
It was.
What were some of the sticking points?
Well, some of the sticking points was the hang-ups that I carried with me from my humble beginnings.
Right.
I mean, a lot of that secrecy and afraid to reveal things was because I knew that I was very, very good, that this was world class, and that it had the potential to do. I knew it had the potential to do something very big, and I wasn't 100% sure what the medium, like what that would have been encapsulated in, what the version of that would have been. But I knew it had the potential to do something huge, and because I came from such scarcity, right, I feared losing the huge commodity that I was suddenly in possession of, right? You know, we were I come from a primary school where the windows were bulletproof and the playground was on the roof. The kids had to walk up the fire escape to go to the roof for about the first half of my elementary, primary school years, before they eventually, the trouble settled down a bit and we were able to get a playground outside. So the kids didn't get shot, right? The windows were bulletproof and they had steel grills over them, right? And the man used to arrive, the EEC man, the European Economic Community guy, used to arrive once a month with a big box full of food for people in the area where I lived. And there were just white tins, right? Listen, there were white tins that had 3 blue letters on them that said EEC with wee dots right, in between, which was an acronym that stood for the European Economic Community, right? In the 80s. It was before the EU and before all that. And this was essentially aid, welfare, food that was coming from countries in Europe. And you didn't know what was in the tins, right? This was distributed amongst the community. So it was like a lottery. Yeah. You were shaking the tin and stuff to try and like, hear the consistency before you opened it, because once you opened it, you had to eat it, right? Is it stew? Is it custard? Is it those like Frankfurter sausage things that like are all stacked together? Or what is it?
Sardines.
Is it sardines? Is it butter beans? Right? And so it was like a lottery. And that's where I came from, right? And my mother and father worked so hard and sacrificed so much so that we could have something a bit beyond that. It's not that we had any more money than anybody else. It's that they sacrificed more things for themselves personally. Like I looking back, I can remember my father not eating in a day, maybe 2, and my mother doing the same thing sometimes, and then we were eating dinner, you know, so that we didn't have to all eat the EEC thing, which was running low or whatever it was. So we were like poverty line. And this is my background. So all of a sudden, I'm doing this thing that people want to give me a lot of money for. And that happened over the period of 10 years locally, right? So it reached a stage of critical mass locally where it couldn't get any bigger with just me. And I started hiring some people who I trusted, who I was familiar with. And even some of them started letting me down and like trying to steal what I had taught them and use like a bastardized version of it. And this is how kind of the body transformation trend actually started in Belfast. Yeah. It was former students of mine were the first people who took it beyond me. There was actually a guy who used to work for me, real good guy, who was doing a personal training course in that.
College?
Yeah, at that college. I was going to call it Biffy because I'm so old. It's not that, it's called something Matt.
Yeah.
And it was like a level 3 personal training thing. And he took a picture on his phone and sent it to me one day. I was the subject of one of the lectures. This was going back 5 or 6 years. Paul McIlroy and the 12-week transformation explosion in Belfast.
Boom.
Right? So, I mean, I could have told you that anyway, but apparently other people also recognized it. And so, but this was the embryonic stages of this. Was like, you know, this person learning enough and going this way and this person going on. And I used to take it very personally and used to be very guarded then with who I was letting in. And then I realized, you know what? He might not have done that for the right reasons, but he's taken something that I've shown him. He hasn't fully understood it, but the 30% that he has taken with him, he's doing good with it. Yeah. He is actually helping people who I don't have a reach for. I was the catalyst of that. I might have even been the impetus for it. Or, again, see, there's the ego. Whatever it was I was gifted with being able to do was the catalyst of that, and I was the person who decided to carry it out. Yeah. And then they were able to take that branch, that fractal spurring off, a crossroad started to come off from me, and the branches started to come off. And it kind of wrote itself, Lenny, because as soon as I opened up to that, other people internationally, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put this out here. And, you know, it drew a lot of international attention. It was just transformation after transformation after, and they were so dramatic. And then people were going, oh, he's photoshopping people. So then me and Dwayne started doing videos back before deep fake even existed. We're going back like 12 years here or something like that. And I was like, okay, so there he actually is. That's actually the human being at the start, like this. Yeah. And this is him actually later. And it's the same timeline. And then they were like, oh, but blah, 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 but this, but that. And I'm like, okay, this has happened like well over 1,000 times, even in Belfast. Like something like 1,500 times, even in Belfast, right? And they're getting better and better and better. Now I'm going to start putting up videos of their physical abilities. And you're seeing double body weight pull-ups, triple body weight deadlifts, and powerlifting records and this and that. So this was starting to draw. Parallel to this, I was also a friend of Pavel Satsalin, and we also brought hardstyle kettlebells for the first time ever in the UK or Ireland. We brought the first certification here. We were the first people to bring Pavel here. I was a part of that community since the early noughties, even when I was still boxing. I Googled one arm pull up or something like that on a very, very early stage. I may even have been Ask Jeeves, right? And Dragon Door website came up, and I seen an article on it, and that's how I first got talking to Pavel online. And I only sent him an email there a couple of months ago.
Yeah, that escalated.
You know? So that escalated. So that really escalated quickly.
Isn't it weird though? Because it's
know?
like, what's it saying? When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Oh, I like that. I haven't heard that before.
And
That's
so
true.
you just changed the way you looked at things.
Yes.
Realistically, the environment kind of stayed the same, but you changed the way you looked at it.
Yeah.
And next thing was a shift.
Yes.
Like right across the board.
Yes.
And so now you're in 180 locations around the world. You developed this relationship with Pavel. And for anyone that doesn't know, the original guy who you sent me to, which is, go and do the RKC. At the time,
Was
you
Pavel,
were, was Pavel, it was Pavel's certification, but you were the CEO of RKC Ireland
at that time.
At that time.
Yeah.
And so, that's nuts.
One community were noticing all my strength feats that I was doing personally on things like YouTube. And then they were also noticing the results of this amazing 12 transformation we're doing. And then, people from the wider fitness community were starting to notice this. And I was getting inundated with all these, like, I want to come over and intern with you from like England, even from America, wanting to come over. How much would it be to stay over in Belfast? I'm like, that's not a good idea. No, it's not. But then it started to mount up. And I just sat down with everybody and I was like, these results are shocking. Not just aesthetically, but also functionally. Nobody's doing this. This is a very marketable commodity that seems to have a market, international market, because people are people. And the only thing people want from a gym is a body transformation. Now, you might say, oh, well, what they want is better mobility and better strength and be able to pick up their kids and to do all this. Yes, but the only thing that achieves that, something transformative is going to happen no matter what you do in a gym. No matter what you pick up, something transformative is going to happen. You're going to get stronger. You're going to build muscle. You're going to lose fat. Guess what that is? That's a body transformation. No matter what the goal is, a body transformation actually is the outcome, right? To a certain extent, right? So you might as well cut the middleman out and say, right, this is what we do best. And all of a sudden, people kind of appreciated the honesty of that light. And the fitness community was like, right, actually the only thing that people are paying me for are results, and these results are insane. So I'm going to pay him to teach me how to do that. And it was also a very clear avenue for those wee semicircles that I was talking about. Optimize yourself, dare to help your family, dare to help your community, dare to help the world. I was never going to train 15,000 people in Belfast by myself, right? It's eventually going to be 100,000. It's eventually going to be 1 million. These are my goals, right? Bodies transformed. So it was kind of a decade local, or almost a decade local, and now a decade international come October this year. So it's insane.
Fitting with your philosophy on the nervous system, is it a nervous system transformation? Because it starts in the head, and I know that you've been quoted as saying strength isn't built, it is granted by your nervous system.
Yes.
Well, what do you mean when you say that?
What's that shit all about? It's an often quoted, somewhat understood adage, I suppose, to varying degrees. And I know you know what it is, but I know you're asking for the listener, so I'm going to indulge you. But I know you know it all too well. Not only that, you've experienced it.
Yeah.
The central nervous system is the governor of human force production, okay? And it's also the governor of, the progression of human force production. To keep it simple, in quote unquote lay terms. The mechanism of how the human body gets stronger and exhibits more force isn't actually fully understood. There are a few, there are two types of sports science in this world, and there's two types of strength-orientated research. There's the real empirical laboratory type stuff, which like to isolate individual things and test them for a period of time and see what that outcome is. And then there's the pragmatic kind of in the trenches strength and conditioning specialist with a sports science tilt to it, who doesn't pragmatically have the time really to wait on 1,000 different studies that are really, really cheaply funded, that maybe don't come to any real conclusions, but that they have, through a studied analysis of the history of better ideas in strength programming as defined by the results that they were able to consistently produce over a long period of time, you come to a conclusion that, well, A plus B equals C here, right? And I know this. So there's those who like to figure out the mechanisms behind the why, and there's those who just want to optimize, the how, but it's like I'm not really that concerned. And I don't think I have enough time left on the clock or personal inclination to work out all the reasons why you get stronger. But I do want to optimize the understanding of the most efficient and most profound ways to get stronger, because the only thing that drives that is pragmatic, result-based outcomes.
Here's a question.
Yep.
And again, it's just my own personal curiosity. Do you feel like tissue adaptation has to occur in order for strength to occur?
No, but it can enhance it,
right,
quite a bit. So your nervous system, you're capable of, well, here's the thing, maybe to a certain extent, yes, right? Like tissue adaptation has to occur to a certain extent. It's actually probably physically impossible to have no tissue adaptation to strength training, right? No matter how low the reps are. But muscular hypertrophy likes to plateau because carrying extra muscle is inefficient for our species, is my theory. And it's borne out in practical observation. You don't see, like every species of animal develops to the level of muscularity that is most conducive to its survival and doesn't go beyond that. We're the only one who artificially likes to enhance that. So beyond a certain point, that's why muscle hypertrophy likes to plateau, right?
And
muscle
atrophy
force,
in a sense as well.
and atrophy in a sense as well, to get back to baseline. Yes, keenly observed. So the small amount of tissue adaptation, which is unavoidable, will plateau quickly, and it is then possible to get stronger and stronger and stronger without actually building any appreciable amount of skeletal muscle on top of that. Any actually mechanistic, the muscle getting bigger, and even less in terms of capillarization and blood volume, because the type of training that's most conducive to increasing strength without increasing or stimulating muscular hypertrophy is low volume and submaximal. And it's either high frequency or low frequency, but it's submaximal and low volume enough to not create enough of a stimulatory fact. And you don't get a pump, essentially. In lay terms, there is a connection between the pump and a muscle stimulation. There's a connection between force production and muscle stimulation. There's a connection between a buildup of fatigue metabolites and muscle growth stimulation, right? And interestingly, those three mechanisms have been found. There is definitely a room for research. They've highlighted things like this, which is nice. But that old school bodybuilders have known for a long time. Yeah. So let me tell you something that you already know, but that now science has confirmed, that muscle growth can be stimulated via completely separate pathways. Meaning, and this is very interesting, meaning that you can set up your programming in such a way that mostly stimulates muscle growth from a fatigue metabolite stimulating perspective, from a force perspective, and from other different avenues. Okay, so the best way to create universal muscle growth is to set your programming up in such a way that stimulates all three or all four, however many there actually are. But all of that is easily second place and slave to finding ways to progress the amount of weight. So let me put it to you this way. If a certain amount of volume creates a pump, and a pump stimulates muscle growth, and a certain amount of load creates force production, and that force production stimulates muscle growth via a separate pathway, right? And a certain amount of volume also stimulates fatigue metabolites in the system, and that stimulates growth via a separate pathway, right? The question then becomes, what's the fastest pathway to improve the amount of weight that you're lifting? Because that, by the way, force stimulus is still observably the most powerful stimulus to create muscle growth, as well as strength.
Well, that's what they say, force is the language of cells.
And this is why, right? So if the question then becomes, how can you set up your programming in such a way that allows you to get as strong as possible, which will, an ever increasing exposure to higher amounts of load will continue to expose your muscles to greater and greater force production, which will continue to stimulate that force production based muscle growth stimulus, but do so in the rep range and overall volume that also stimulates a muscle pump and also accumulates fatigue metabolites, inorganic phosphate ions, hydrogen ions, all these things within the muscle cell to stimulate that way, right? These are always happening because this is always happening. So it's about getting as strong as possible, as fast as possible, as perpetually as possible in the rep ranges that are going to give you a pump, right? So you just keep growing.
Whenever you started, I know whenever you started doing transformations, purely by chance, right? My guess is that the first iteration of that is much different to the next one, and maybe not completely out of the ballpark. It evolved for sure. So, in the early days, did you take all of this into consideration, or was this done through trial and error?
A bit of both.
By
that point, by the very first point, I was a certified strength and conditioning specialist, a CSCS under the NSCA, it's like an American thing. And I was also a qualified sports scientist, and I was also, a many-year athletic veteran, and I had also for my own, the majority of my education has come from reading widely around the subject matter itself for years and years, and then whatever natural proclivity that I have towards, and I do have one, towards applied mathematics, right? It then was translated into this area of interest. Like, for example, when was it? It was a few years ago. It was pre-COVID. It was probably 2018, 2019. My wife took this online test. It was a like an aptitude test for computer programming.
Okay.
And this particular role in computer programming is an American website, and apparently if you score highly in this, you have a very high aptitude to become a computer programmer or a coder or anything like this. And it's a number of questions with a maximum of 26, and you've got 26 minutes or 25 minutes, I think, to set it online. And I scored 25 out of 26, right? So
Carmel's like,
right?
You bastard.
She knew, that's why she got me to do it. She just, out of curiosity, she wanted to see what would happen. So my point is This could have went any number of boring directions, but it's the weapon has been pointed towards strength programming for decades at this point. And so the weapon has it's a lot more exciting. Well, at least for me. Do you know, some of that stuff might be exciting for the people who are doing it. Yeah. The point is I had a natural interest in strength that probably led all the way back to me needing to transform and being obsessed with those heroes who transformed from weak to strong. And, you know, I was being bullied and then I became strong because I stood up to him. And it's all this sort of organic globule of synergism that's just leading me this way. And so whatever way my brain worked was then pointed towards this. And I started to discover patterns.
What do you think about when you hear the term? I actually heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say this here. He said, maths is the language of the universe. What do you think about when you hear that term?
He's accurate. That is actually, I don't know if he said it specifically, but he's paraphrasing. It's actually a very prolifically misquoted line. Right. But it's essentially saying the same thing. He has secularized it a wee bit. The original quote was from Galileo Galilei. Right. The Italian physicist, engineer, very famous, Galileo. Yeah. And I believe, I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm going to try and quote this verbatim. I believe what he said was that mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe, something like that. Okay. Yeah. I'll
look that up.
So, listen, it's a slightly different focus on what is essentially the same point. So it's largely irrelevant what the actual source is, but I agree in both cases. In a nutshell. Because in a nutshell, I agree. Like, my brain is unusual. I look around this room and I see hexagons, I see octagons, I see shapes everywhere. I'm counting the angles in them subconsciously as we've been talking. You know, I notice everything. I see patterns. It's bizarre. It is bizarre, but at this point at 44, I can get it under control, and I have had it under control for a long time. And again, it allows me, this weirdness allows me to do the things that I do as well as I do them. So I'm very, very grateful for whatever it is that was here and that is here. And, you know, like my son, who's 11, did a presentation on the Fibonacci sequence in school and won like this like maths award thing. And the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, is actually a really good example of, you know, of mathematics being the alphabet with which God wrote the universe, or, you know, or the language of the universe, whatever your perspective, your chosen perspective is. And it's a reoccurring series of numbers where the next number is the sum total of the two preceding numbers, right? So 1 and 1 makes 2. So then that 2 and that 1 makes 3, and the 2 and the 3 makes 5, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But this pattern, this golden ratio, when expressed as a pattern, forms a spiral. It goes like this. Yeah, we've all seen a spiral. And this sequence reoccurs throughout everything in existence. Everything. It reoccurs throughout our body in multiple areas. You know, our hands, for example, have 8 fingers, and there are three bones in each finger. There are 2 bones in every one thumb, and there is 1 thumb in every hand, right? And those are all Fibonacci numbers, right? And if you look at the crown, the hair, I'm getting bizarre, okay?
Let's go there.
If you look at the crown on your head, the hair, it follows the Fibonacci sequence. It goes out in a spiral, and these numbers, the number the next number is 1.6 times the row before it, essentially. So that's the golden ratio. That's the Fibonacci sequence. Right. Every number ends up being 1.6 times approximately more than the one that precedes it. This is seen in pine cones. It's seen throughout plants. It's seen in the fractal nature of how leaves appear on branches. Whales have been observed now for the first time in the past few years with drones, swimming in the formation of the Fibonacci sequence in spirals. Sheep can sometimes just randomly start walking this way. Snail shells, the formation of horns on animals. All plants, essentially, inside fruit when you cut it open. You know, listen, I could go on and get really nerdy with this. Galaxies, spiral, right?
Yeah.
You know, supernovas, all these things. It is essentially, it looks very much like the fingerprint of an intentional design that wraps itself up in the very fiber of everything in existence. And then the creatures who exhibit it, like us, build things subconsciously that exhibit it as well, because it's all over architecture. It's all over everything. And human beings as well, whose facial symmetry in terms of width divided by length, who come closer, it's bizarre, it's true, who come closer to the golden ratio of 1.6 to 1 ratio, are consistently perceived, regardless of age or gender, as more attractive by both genders.
And that's length to width ratio?
Yeah. Yeah, I probably wouldn't actually score high on that because I have actually quite a wide face.
Is your beard enhanced?
Yeah, there I am about there. But I have quite a wide face. I have like a head like a cannonball. But yeah, so that's interesting, isn't it?
That is.
So it's definitely, as that applies to programming, essentially if you get the numbers right, you can do anything, you know. And the whole strength being granted and not built refers to the fact that the nervous system is the gatekeeper to progress. And what we do in the gym is the language that we're communicating with that gatekeeper in. And if you picture a bouncer on the door, and he's gonna be the one who allows you either extra strength or keeps you out. Why would he keep you out from extra strength? Well, because again, just like carrying extra muscle is unnatural. You know, like if I could wave a magic wand right now and make you 300 pounds of muscle, you'd be jacked in 10 and it would be awesome. Right? But listen, your heart would be the same size. And so relative to the size of your internal organs, every single action of your day that you could do would be exponentially more difficult. And would get more difficult as it got more difficult, right? And so you would be in more and more danger of a heart attack the heavier you got, even if your body fat percentage was really low, because that heart is working so much harder to oxygenate all that tissue, even if it's tissue, right? Yeah. So, you know, and strength, it's the reason why we have a cap on how much force we can produce. Each and every one of us is capable of superhuman force right now. And we've seen this throughout pop culture, peppered throughout history. So-and-so lifted a car to try and save their child. If the motivation is high enough, we can produce superhuman amounts of force. I even have some like vague examples of this in my own life where I've done things that are stronger than I could normally do because I was very motivated to do it for particular reasons. And so in many ways, your central nervous system, which is you, but also in some sense exists outside of you, for you, right? Sees force as a threat.
Yeah.
And sees increasing force production as a threat. And sees increasing muscle tissue as a threat. So the language with which you communicate with this, it's not a separate entity, but it helps pragmatically think about it as such. With this separate entity, which is the central nervous system, the CNS, needs to be as friendly and as accommodating as possible, or the bouncer's not letting you in and it's not letting anything else out. So I spotted this pattern with my pattern spotting brain, right? That the reoccurring theme in progressively better programming solutions appeared to be increased time in a given training cycle spent training in relative comfort. So when we look at the failure model,
which was, I mean, Mike Menser.
Mike Menser is big into it, yeah.
Yeah, which is very much, you know, failure, like
he goes beyond failure even.
Train to max sets to failure.
Yeah.
So he kind of popularized it. I mean, it wasn't his thing.
No, it wasn't his thing. Arthur Jones, he's not even the original, a guy called DeLorme.
Yeah, the Lorem method.
The DeLorme method, the famous, that's why everybody does 3 sets of 10, because of DeLorme. Because of one study where he showed that there was muscle growth in young men untrained.
Of course.
Listen, can I tell you something? See, when I was a young man untrained, me and you could have walked up and down there carrying the shopping a few times, and your biceps would get a fraction bigger. Anyway, so the whole 3 sets of 10 failure came from that. Arthur Jones took that a step further. Mike Manser took it a step further. Dorian Yates took it a step further. It's not that it's not effective. See, here's the problem. Here's the paradox, right? Going to muscular failure, training to muscular failure is the most stimulative, it creates the biggest stimulation in existence for both muscle growth and strength that there can be. But it doesn't matter for several reasons, right? Because it is short-lived. To put a point on it, it doesn't matter when we take a workout in isolation, which is the problem with most short-term studies. When you're taking untrained college-aged males and training them for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, even, especially 3, 4, 6 weeks, which most of them are. If I'm training harder than you, I will exhibit more results early on, right? But my nervous system is going to hate that, and this adapt or die approach, if you're natural, isn't going to last very long. This adapt or die approach, if you have average to below average genetic ability, isn't going to last too long. This adapt or die approach, if you're female and not male, it's going to last even shorter. This adapt or die approach, if you're middle-aged or older, it's going to last even shorter. If you have a stressful life, if you're drug-free, you add all these things up and it just gets less and less and less and less. The more the individual, the test subject starts to resemble the average person, the less productive that approach starts to get. It's still the most productive short term, but the shorter and shorter that term of production becomes, right? So what is optimal right now in isolation is completely irrelevant when you're talking about an entity which is designed to live for 100 years, which is a human being, right? I want to make the most progress possible over the course of 12 weeks, 6 months, a year, 10 years, right? And when you look at it through that lens, the failure model falls like miserably short. And what we see is that most powerlifters, the strongest people in the world, spend, Olympic weightlifters as well, and strongmen, all the strongest people in the world. Just before Olympic weightlifters get bent out of shape and go, we're the strongest people in the world, Paul. There's a real rivalry thing there. Yeah. And strongmen turn around and go, well, you are all midgets, we're the strongest people in the world. Go pull a truck and see how strong you are, right? So all of the strongest people in the world train very similar in that they use a microcosm version of periodization called strength cycling, where you essentially it's characterized by starting off with sub-maximal loads for the given number of reps and cycling over a period of time where the proximity to failure gets greater and greater and culminates with a maximum happening on the platform, right? But that improved maximum was facilitated by the time spent building trust with the central nervous system and therefore allowing you to use more and more of the force production and strength rope that already exists in, say, the superhuman potential in your muscles. Or the same nervous system allows you to adapt to what's happening and allows you to use a lower percentage of the already genetically predisposed 50% motor unit limit. So in other words, you become more efficient. So you either get to use more or you become more efficient with the set amount that you're allowed to use. Either way, again, I haven't done the research to work out which one that is, and I don't care because pragmatically,
why would you?
This process leads to this result, and that's my game. My game is results. So that's how you get stronger. And so then I noticed a pattern, and I was like, okay, so increased time spent in comfort, improved strength outcomes, medium and long term, right? So what if we took the need for that peak away altogether? What if we extracted ourselves from the artificially self-induced world that we live in, where you must compete in a competition for a plastic trophy, or every 6 weeks with yourself in a gym for no reason whatsoever other than it's Sunday, right? And just go, you know what? Never mind the peak. Let's spend as much time as possible training in what we can effectively be termed a comfort zone, and never leave it, but expand it through comfortable training that is progressed in a specific manner, where the variables are manipulated in a very specific way so as to be the least threatening as possible to the gatekeeper, thus optimizing the percentage chance that said gatekeeper will allow you more. And so just expand that the base of that pyramid, right? Because, you know, displaying your maximum strength is a pyramid. There's a base, which is usually higher volume and lower intensity. And then there's an inverse relationship between intensity and volume as it goes like so, right up to that 1 rep maximum, right? Preferably on a platform somewhere for a record, right? But what about if I just said, never mind the peak, and just kept building the base wider and wider and wider? Because it's much easier to make progress down here in the easy place than it is up here, where there's no margin for error and your central nervous system is starting to go, hold on, you're not the friend I thought you were.
Yeah.
Stop, plateau, right? So I just build this as wide as humanly possible. And what happens to a pyramid the wider its base gets?
Yeah, taller the peak.
The taller the peak, our kid. Yes, indeed. So, in other words, right, if I can operate at very, very distal proximity to maximum, that'll allow me to get stronger faster, because it's easier. And I'm going to be able to do that for a longer period of time, because the gatekeeper doesn't see the threat coming, right? But really, I'm building my army for the ultimate assault that could come in any time I want it to, right? And I'm just building this wider and wider and wider and wider until one day, maybe for a world record or just for a personal record that's not even that impressive to anybody but me, I will bring the army to his gates just once, right? And that's how you do it. And nobody's really doing it quite like that. They do it like that, but the base is shorter and the pyramid's smaller, and then they do another one, they go like this. But that's a pattern that becomes old very quickly, right? There's a way to do it where it's almost imperceptible by the central nervous system that anything's going on. And you just get stronger and stronger. If I improve significantly or to any degree, any percentage of my 1 rep maximum, in other words, if I lower the RPE of any given percentage of my 1 rep maximum, I will lower the RPE of every given percentage of my 1 rep maximum up to and including 100%. It is literally a mathematical impossibility not to. Yes, it will have more of an immediate effect on the percentages that are most proximal north and south of it. So what that means is, if I make big gains in the 50% range, it's going to affect every percentage, but it will affect most 40 and 60, right? But if I can expand what represents 50, and I can expand what represents 60, and I can keep expanding what represents any percentage, then I have instantly and simultaneously expanded what represents every one, until eventually what used to represent 100 doesn't anymore. And not only does it not, it's inside a comfort zone. So it's not just you've made 100% easier to the point where it's now 95%. You've made it so easy that it's a training load. It's a Monday. You don't even have to, put on Rocky for or take creatine before or any pre-workout.
I know you're...
That's the goal. That's the goal of the comfort zone expansion method, and that's the whole thing around strength isn't built, it's granted.
I know you're an anthropology man.
Yes.
And evolutionary biology.
Yes.
And I always bring it up to people. I suggest, because this, for me, I'm like, this is gold, because I say to people, well, what were you naturally selected to do? Which most people say, well, hunt and gather. And how long did we hunt and gather for? much longer than what we know the world as
Yeah,
today.
yeah,
And so no hunter-gatherer ever wakened up on a random Sunday and said, let's test my max.
No, I have to laugh at these caveman workouts. Cavemen weren't working out.
Nah,
They were trying to do as little as possible to not break something because there was no such thing as antibiotics or the hospital. There was just alive or dead. And, you know, the line between those two was blurry and small.
And you know, success leaves clues.
Success leaves clues and failure leaves detailed blueprints. So yes, you know, as a species, if we want to add the artificial extra levels of performance that can be termed supraphysiological, meaning beyond our peak physiological destiny, so to speak. Like our strength probably should have peaked, me and you, when we were maybe 25, and that's it. And then slow regression from there as, you know, we get older.
Yeah.
Right? But I know you're the strongest you've ever been in your life. I'm 44, and I'm the strongest I've ever been in my life, and I've been trying to be the strongest I've ever been in my life since the 1990s. Right? So it's not like I started training late. No, I'm just stronger than I was when I was younger, because I've cracked the cheat code, so to speak, of this governor, and I've been able to convince to keep allowing more and more as time goes by. It's artificial, right? We're not meant to be as strong as some people get, right? We're meant to be physical, strong animals. We're certainly not meant to be, you know, couch potatoes who are morbid. Nobody's born naturally morbidly obese, right? Yes, individuals have varying levels of ability and inability to lose and gain fat, and susceptibility to gaining and losing fat. But nobody is born under optimal human conditions, optimal human activity, optimal human diet to be morbidly obese, right? So we are definitely not meant to be weak, but we're not meant to be Eddie Hall. We're not meant to be even Michael Lennon or Paul McIlroy or the average person who trains for 6 months in a gym. So if it's an unnatural process that our body is actually fighting against, we need to figure out a way so that it's less threatening. And that's exactly what you could say the pragmatic, ultra-proliferated, anecdotal science project that has been the Amazing 12, and literally all the training I've ever done with myself and every other client has proven to me.
You mentioned earlier about there were people who were questioning some of your results back in the day.
Yeah.
And
some funny ones.
Hatred is a condition of success, and you've no doubt been successful over the past decade plus with your endeavor, with the Amazing 12, with Santaur. Pretty much everything you've touched has turned to gold. And so I would assume that with that has also brought a lot of, maybe hatred's a strong word, but you know what comes with it. It's still, you know, just critics. Like, how do you process that yourself? How do you deal with it today? Because I know, again, a lot like me back in the day, you coming from a boxing background and given, you know, the environment that you find yourself in, your initial response is like, oh, we're fighting, are we? Well, let's go down that route. But obviously, as you get older, you mature. I would imagine that your thought process has changed slightly. How do you deal with that today? How did you deal with it in the past?
Yeah, well, those are two different answers. So we come from an analog. Listen, our generation is a well. You're a millennial, but you're an older millennial, and I'm a young Gen X, and we're actually in a subcategory that people are calling Xennials.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, between 1977 and 1983 sort of region, 84 maybe. And so what it is you are growing up in a semi-analog, you know, an analog, mostly analog childhood, and then a digital like adult, like early adulthood to maybe teenage years for you, and that comes with you know, with certain baggage. Like initially, when I first started doing all this stuff on the internet, I wanted a few analog solutions to those digital problems. You know, I wanted to be right in front of the individual saying, look, hold on a wee second, motherfucker.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Do you know, you calling this whole thing a lie? You know, let me show you physically, this is this person. So for a start, what I had to do was understand that it's actually understandable. When out of nowhere, all of a sudden, this guy from Belfast starts putting up dozens, eventually hundreds, and then thousands of transformations where these people look like they've been training for 10 years, and I'm trying to say it was 12 weeks. It's natural enough for some people to go to suspect that that's not true, that these people have been paid to say this, or that it's been much longer than 12 weeks, or whatever the case may be, right? Or I don't even know them, and I'm pulling the faces from the internet somewhere, or something like that, right? So what I try not to do now is get angry at what is actually a natural reaction, right? And I say, right, okay, I understand what you're saying, but this has been going on now for almost 20 years, and let me take you right back to the start. Let me take you to a website where you're going to see thousands of these individuals. Let me show you video footage of doctors, lawyers, policemen, builders, people from all walks of life who are saying on camera, I did this and it worked. Let me show you people that look like you, because it's also defensive. It's also they don't want, and I'm not saying this is probably a bit too of a generality, but in many cases, potentially more often than not, when someone criticizes like that, it's because they see themselves in the before picture but don't see themselves in the after. They don't see it possible for them. And so because I've went to the gym and I've tried, and I stopped eating takeaway, and I done this and I done that, and I look nothing like that picture. And it took me 2 years, and I still look nothing like that picture, so you're lying because I couldn't do it.
And,
you know?
And the more social proof that you have,
exactly,
it is like the more convinced you, because it's almost like, you know, someone saying to you, oh, well, you're out of shape and you're weak.
Yeah.
You're going to be like,
no.
I
know.
There's nothing you could say to me like that would,
there was a person who was a sort of a semi-friend, a friend of me, at one point, who every time he bumped into me used to say, oh, you look like you're getting smaller if you stop training and stuff like that. And because I only ever care about strength, and because I know what my numbers are at all times, I'm like, really? That's good. That means my strength to body weight ratio must be going up because I'm actually getting stronger, so I don't care. You know, it's, as you say, the more tangible evidence you have, and that's the actual power of the A12, body transformations in general, but strength training and physical training, even for cardio, specifically in general, right, is the quantifiability of it. The empirical, non-deniable fact that you have improved. It cannot be faked. You can go into a psychiatrist's office and they can tell you you've come far. In all other aspects of life, or most other aspects of life, progress is a subjective thing. But in the weight room, it is only ever objective, because 300 pounds is always 300 pounds and it doesn't give a fuck what you think. Right? Sorry for cursing, but it doesn't care. It doesn't care. If you had a bad day, a good day, if you're ready for it or if you're not. If you have the audacity to take that out of the rack, put it on your back, in your hands, it will be what it is always. And then whatever you are is going to show up. Right? So, you know, talk's cheap. It takes money to buy drink, as somebody told me many years ago in relation to fighting, right? Which is true. Words are just words. Show me your actions. And, you know, when you improve quantifiably over and over and over again in strength, over and over again in your cardiovascular fitness, when you have quantifiable, measurable, undeniable, it doesn't matter what anybody says. Oh, I don't think that's working. I know it is, because I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I've done that. And that's where the mental and emotional transformation comes from, any type of physical transformation. You know, and that's what's beautiful about strength.
Yeah, agreed, mate. Paul, thank you so much for coming on here to join us. I have one more question for you, and I'm really appreciative of your time today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Like, I'm sure my audience will be as well. But are we humans having a spiritual experience, or are we spirits having a human experience?
Well, that went somewhere quick, didn't it? Yeah, that's a hell of a question. One that might not immediately look like it applies to strength conditioning or anything like that, but actually it applies to everything really, because it is actually everything. That's the question of everything, really, isn't it? The correct answer from everyone is, I don't know, right? But I sense you're searching for more than that. And so, well, anytime I'm judging the effectiveness of anything or the likelihood or probability of anything, by the way, as you've probably ascertained by now, I have a very mathematic, STEM field orientated thought process.
Just a little.
Just a wee bit, right? I don't tend to place any weight on conjecture, only on evidence of various kinds as they present themselves, right? And, you know, the only way to actually truly judge something is to compare, is to have a control and an experimental and actually compare what's actually happening. Do a certain thing, make a change in the experimental, see what happens, right? And when we compare likelihoods and probabilities with your question, we find, well, you know, getting back to that Fibonacci sequence, right? Getting back to multiple things which point towards, to me, towards there being way more to existence than what we understand. Now, we don't know really what that means, but that's remarkable, right? And it would be even more remarkable if it was somehow randomly by chance and had no other meaning outside of the fact that we just happen to observe it everywhere, right? On top of that, there's the notion of perception and what our senses allow us to perceive, right? And, you know, I like to give the example when people ask me similar things of the ant and the iPod, I call it, right? So if you have an iPod or I'm old, let's say iPod or whatever the latest things you crazy kids are doing, right? Some sort of implant that goes into your brain, whatever it is, some sort of technology sitting on the ground, right? A highly sophisticated creature can walk straight over the top of that literally every day of its tiny life, and not only not know even remotely the potential that exists inside that thing, but lack the senses and the perception to even know that it's there, or to sense the discernible difference between that and the rock that was beside it. Oh, that was a ever so slightly slightier rock that doesn't even register in whatever tiny brain that it has, right? Well, we have this hubris, this human hubris, because we observably appear to be the most intelligent animal on this planet, although I think when we figure out how to talk to whales and dolphins, it's questionable, right? But consider some of our actions. I don't know how intelligent we are, but that's only relative to what we can see and observe. Where's our iPod, right? What are we the ant to? What if our 5, 6 senses, whatever, you know, some people have a sixth sense, you want to say that, whatever. Where's our 5 tangible senses? What exists outside the limit of those? Because we do know that, you know, radio waves and X-rays and all these things that are physically measurable with certain devices and are visually observable are outside of our own physical perceptions, right? What metaphysical reality exists outside of our physical reality, and is there any evidence of it, right? And so when we look at that in relation to your question, we see that there has never been any empirical evidence ever which has definitively proven life after death, let's say. There's also never been any empirical evidence ever that has physically proven that there's not life after death. So we have to take empirical evidence and say that they've neutralized each other, because both have failed to meet that prerequisite. Now, what's good science then is to then look at anecdotal evidence. If there's no empirical on either side and it's a stalemate, we must look to the anecdotal because it's the only thing that takes precedence over nothing on the other side. And so there is almost zero anecdotal evidence that there's no life after death or that this is the only perceivable physical reality that there is. However, there is an insurmountable, overwhelming, at this point potentially hundreds of thousands of anecdotal accounts of near-death experiences, life after death, observation of things that don't make sense, strangeries, people taking DMT, going to realms that don't make any sense, telling them things about stuff that ends up happening in the future, things that are unexplainable, seeing dead relatives at the foot of your bed. You know, there's a reoccurring thing in hospitals, and apparently millions of doctors and nurses who have been at the bedside of people who are dying have reported this thousands of times, where people will say that actually sit, as I'm looking at you, say I can see my mother and father or my brother or whatever it is sitting at the foot of their bed, and shortly later they pass away. Now, if I wanted to play devil's advocate to that, I could say, okay, well, there's oxygen deprivation going on because they're near death, and maybe they're hallucinating because of the morphine that they've been given, and you can rationalize that away, but every single time, the same thing over and over with widely varying degrees of things like oxygen deprivation, widely varying degrees of things like a syringe driver and how much of it's going into the bloodstream, and that same amount was going in an hour earlier, but they didn't see anybody, and listen, there's been, I seen a show one time where it's on Netflix. It's about there's some things in it that are clearly bullshit, right? Clearly. There's these like mediums who are like, oh, I'm talking to your dead relatives, I'm doing this, and it's actually cringeworthy to watch it. Yeah. So just because a lot of it's bullshit doesn't mean to say that it all is, or that we've got it all figured out. And, I watched this before where this individual had died clinically. And they said that they were outside their body. This is something that has occurred millions of times, thousands at least. And they were able to tell where everything was going on in the room, and this guy was sitting there, and that guy was sitting there. And after they were revived, they were able to tell the doctors everything that was going on in the room. And it was this surgeon who was sitting relaying this, right? A surgeon who was like, I didn't believe in any of this, but now I'm forced to question my own beliefs that maybe I don't know it all, or that maybe there's something to observable reality that's beyond my perception. And there's research which now shows for sure that the pineal gland in the center of the brain at the moment of death releases a megadose of DMT, right? Dimethyltryptamine, which is a very, very intensely powerful hallucinogenic. So bizarre that it would do that, So is that what's happening, and it's just a physical thing? Or is the DMT something that is acting as a physical catalyst for allowing something metaphysical to transcend from the physical realm to something else? We don't know. It's fascinating to talk about it. I don't know the answer. I wouldn't even stagger a guess as to what the answer would be. All I'm saying is there's a lot of anecdotal evidence on this side. There's no empirical evidence, but there's absolutely nothing empirical or anecdotal on the side that says there's absolutely nothing beyond this. So innately, I would have to say, based on the science, that there's a higher probability that we are a spiritual being having a physical experience.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us on the Fitness Business Life podcast. It was absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
You are an absolute legend.
Dylan, you son of a bitch!